January 14th, 2019, our first meeting of 2019, and our first actual live streaming for the 2019 year. So I'd first call the meeting to order and ask for an adoption of the agenda, please. Councillor Thames.
Mr. Mayor.
2019, our first meeting of 2019, and our first actual live streaming for the 2000.
Works.
Are we good to go? All right, the motion on the table. All in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. And on to the adoption of the minutes. Item 3.1, minutes of regular meeting council, December 17th, 2018. Mr. Armfield.
Yeah, council has in front of it for its consideration the meeting minutes from December the 17th. If there's any amendments or changes you'd like to see to those meeting minutes, please let us know and we'll execute those. Otherwise, they're up for adoption.
Great, thank you. Any questions, comments? Someone prepared to make a motion? Councillor Firth.
Thank you. I move to adopt the minutes of the regular meeting of council from December 17th, 2018 as presented.
Motion on the table. Any further discussion? All in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. On to business arising. There are no business arising. Bylaws. No bylaws. Item number 6. Action item 6.1. Southern Tributaries Water Sharing Agreement. Mr. Armfield.
St. Mary's Irrigation District has been working on this probably for about a year in partnership with some other irrigation districts that are beneficiaries of that water that flows through the St. Mary's system. This draft has come to us from the Tabor Irrigation District with regards to putting a structure and an agreement in place ahead of any sort of necessity to ration water to get the municipalities prepared for that in the event, and Southern Alberta essentially prepared for that in the event that there is a need for water rationing. Mr. Scheer has been following this through, so I think I'll turn it over to Mr. Scheer for a bit more detail and then to answer any questions that council may have.
All right, thank you, Mr. Scheer.
Mr. Scheer, just make sure you speak right into the mic, please.
So this agreement was basically designed for everybody that uses water or irrigation water in Southern Alberta. They want all users to ensure that water security is essential for everybody to use. They're trying to get this agreement so it's mutually beneficial and enduring. Enduring means it'll go on forever. So that it's all recognized by the participants in the agreements that they all will have abilities to reuse their water at certain times. So that it really is a good agreement for the town and many water users. It supports future growth with sustainably with development. All irrigation districts wish to support a portion of their allocation equitably and proportionally during times of water shortage, and encourage all participants to conserve water available according to their capacity and reasonable ability to do so. We have a process in town where there's water that's during the irrigation season and off the irrigation season. We'll go through all that. This falls under the Water Act, section number 33. Which is the agreements to water. Alberta Environment will be enforcing all approved assignments within the allocations calculated according to the terms of the agreement, and the districts are asking for 2 committees to be established. One will be the Water Sharing Committee and one will be the Steering Committee. The town will be on the Steering Committee part of it. The Steering Committee will basically recommend anything to the Water Sharing Committee. The Water Sharing Committee will then disperse it to the districts for approval. The districts will always have the last say in any agreements or any disputes, anything like that. So we will probably end up with 1 person on the small local authorities is what is under the steering committee. Okay. All recommendations, therefore, like I said, will go to the districts. The districts will everything that decisions that the districts will make are final and not subject to appeal or arbitration. I wanted to point that out. They all have the final say. Okay, you will have a voting authority if someone gets on the steering committee, but the districts will always end up with the last say. So the rationing for the monthly water rationing process for the sanitaries, basically the town of Taber, will be based on their monthly water use. We do this, we report all this to Alberta Environment already. We report monthly, yearly water uses. So all those records are in place, so that's not a big deal for us to give that information to them. Determination of the available water, and this is important, will be obtained by the current release of farm gate allocation forecast prepared by Alberta Agriculture and Forestry. So they'll say how much water will be coming down, and they'll base any all allocations off of that report. So if there is need for conservation, they'll report that ahead of time, and everybody will get notification, so we can act appropriately. We should point out that this agreement is voluntary. It's up to you if you would like to be a part of this or not. It's a good idea because being a part of the process is also being proactive with your water conservation. And I'll just get into some of the calculations. The calculations are based off of a 5-year average. They're again between non-irrigation and irrigation years. And I did a calculation here just based off of our 2018 water results. So in October, from May to October, our raw water was 1.6 million. Irrigation use was about 3.4 million. 340,000 almost. And to combine, it's just over 2 million for the irrigation season. Raw water between November and April, that's non-irrigation season, is about 1 million cubic meters. So what they do is they'll take the non-irrigation season, subtract it from the irrigation season. You'll end up with about 1 million cubic meters you'll be rationed on, or water conservation on. So I did that reduction based off of the, Schedule C, and the reductions are accordingly 6%. So you would have to lose about 351 cubic meters a day. You do have a current bylaw in place for water conservation that is relevant from 2001. We probably would update it to make sure that this agreement is in there, and maybe have a relook at that bylaw to make it's according to today's allocations. The term of this agreement, like I said, is enduring, so it lasts as long as you're assigned to it. You can leave terminate your participation in the agreement only from November 1st to March. Then beginning of March 1st. So non-irrigation season, basically. But you can leave at any time. So the districts right now are not asking you to sign the agreement. Basically, they're asking for a letter of support from the town of Taber. Are you in agreement with this agreement? Or do you have any, would you like to support any changes within the agreement? It will come back to council for the the final contract. You will have the final chance to review it and make your statements or ask for any changes. So like I said, this time they're just looking for a letter of support.
Okay, any questions whatsoever for Mr. Scheer? Councillor Strauss?
Yes, Your Worship, I have several questions here for Mr. Scheer. How was the reduction mandated previously in the previous agreement? Just exactly how that was done, because when this comes in, it's going to be mandated by your usage. So how is it being done now?
We don't receive anything from the irrigation districts, but I know if there's going to be a shortage, they will ask for water conservation, and they will tell you what it's going to be. We'll know ahead of time now with this because of the forecast. We'll know what our allocation reduction is going to be, which is very important because we can get that out to the public right away. So we lots of times they end up in August. Okay, we got to ration all our water, or July. Well, we're being proactive here. We're setting their water conservation ahead of time.
Okay, so can you explain on Schedule C? I think it's page 35 there. It's got the allocation and the reduction, and I just don't quite follow there because it's got 18 plus inches down to 18 inches. There's no reduction. Is that? I'm not quite sure I follow how that all goes.
So that's just basically saying what the water coming down from the tributaries will be. So if it's 18 inches of water coming down through tributaries, it would accumulate. If there's only 17 inches, well, they're asking for a reduction of 6% of our, what I calculated in that schedule, 6% of our water allocation during the irrigation months. So we'd have to reduce by that 321 cubic meters per day.
Okay, so then is the reduction going to be divided equally amongst all jurisdictions? So if there's a 6% reduction, City of Lethbridge, Medicine Hat, Tabor, all the irrigations, they will all be reduced at the same 6% level?
I couldn't say that for certain, no.
Because I noticed in the agreement here, there's some differentiations between a large local authority and a small local authority. So I'm wondering if there isn't going to be some differentiations in there.
There could be, yes. And I think it's all based on needs and what they can allocate. I don't know if the City of Lethbridge, when they attended that meeting, they were too responsive to this agreement. I have to be open on that. They didn't think it was necessary.
Of course, in the signing of Theo, there's, they don't have Tabor in here. They just have the irrigation district. So
Tabor will be in there. It'll be. It's just a formality of putting your names out of it. Okay.
Councillor Towns.
Yes, and the Schedule C, maybe for clarification, Councillor Strovis, is allocation of water. The 18 inches is the irrigation district allocates to every irrigation farmer a certain amount of water. So they're allocated 18 inches per year on their crop, right? So if there's 18, there's no reduction. If they go down to 17, it's voluntary, and it's the inches that they allocate to the irrigation farmers. So the percentage that they're trying to show is the same percentage that they would like us to follow. And every irrigation district allocates different amount of water. St. Mary's is 18 inches, TID is 18 inches. The LNID is 15. So it's different numbers that they use that they target their allocations on. That's what the farmers allocated. So it's not how much flow is coming down the tributary, it's how much they're allowed to use on that schedule. So it would be voluntary the first bunch, and then from there it becomes wrote in stone the schedule, I would think.
That's how much water they're allowed to use. Correct. Yes.
All right, Councillor Beckering.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Scheer, I understand the intent of the water sharing agreement. I think it's probably a good idea. Was there anything in the discussions regarding age of licenses to be taken into account under the water sharing at all? Because I know for a fact the town of Tabor has a very old license. And, there's an old saying out there under Water Act that first in time, first in right. So
you're absolutely correct. The senior licenses would be put in front of any junior licenses, that's for sure.
So, Mr. Mayor, if I may, so was this considered at all under the water sharing part of it or not?
Yes, it is. It just needs to be put in here correctly, is what I think.
Thank you.
Councillor Towns.
Further to that statement then, so we have this big water license and allocation, and if we do this, and they talk about in this agreement about the joint usage and voluntary and a reassigning of water allocations and water licenses to another district. Are we reassigning any of the town of Tabor's water license to anybody else, or are we maintaining 100% of our license?
My understanding is we would maintain all of our water allocation, yes.
Other than a voluntary sharing of water.
That's correct.
Thank you.
All right, anything else? Just one question, Mr. Scheer. Just from your perspective thus far, you don't see anything problematic or red flag material at this stage?
At this time, no. I think we do need clarification. I did see that where the water could be allocated differently from each user, and I think that needs to be clarified a bit more. I mean, you can see that when a farmer he's not growing a crop. He's summer falling for the year. Does he really need the water? No. But there are other crops that need more water. So that allocation really, how they arrive at it, I think needs to be determined a bit, explained better.
All right, thank you. Anything else? Councillor Bruin.
Mr. Mayor, that's why I think this time we can accept this for information. I'm a little scared to send a letter of support until we see what the other additions may be with allocation and that. So
Like I said, it's going to come back to you for your acceptance anyway. So if you're in generalized support that there, we all share in the pain, I guess, when it is a drought, then it would be good to support your local irrigation districts, basically TID, because we fall under their jurisdiction.
Mr. Mayor, absolutely, I agree with that, Mr. Scheer. We ought to share our water, but I don't like the idea of another city telling us that we can only have this much because we need this much. And
I don't think the city would be telling you. I think it would go back to the committees, like you said, and then final acceptance would be by the districts themselves. And it's always been by the districts anyway. They've always allocated and dispersed the water as they saw fit. Now it's in writing.
All right, thank you. Any other comments, questions? Councillor Thames.
I'm prepared to make a motion, Mr. Mayor.
All right.
Mr. Mayor, I move that council accepts the water sharing agreement for information and directs administration to send a letter of support of the agreement to the TID.
All right, motion on the table.
Your Worship,
Councillor Strauss.
I'd like to support that, but I wonder if you would consider a friendly amendment to supporting it in principle, rather than supporting it as it's written.
It's a very good friendly amendment. I would definitely accept that.
All right, thank you. Friendly amended motion on the table. Any further discussion? All in favor? Carried. Carried? Or carried unanimously?
I walked on in favor.
Not in favor. All right, carried. Thank you. On to item 6.2, public auction reserve. Mr. Armfield.
Yes, this is an RFD that you have seen before. It comes back just about once every year. I'm going to call Mr. Orwa to explain this one. This has to do with tax collections and our challenges of collecting those taxes some years from some residents. And then this is the next step in the chain of trying to collect. Mr. Orwa.
Thank you very much, and members of council. So, so this is the public auction reserve bid, and as Mr. Armfield has said, it comes every year. And I think according to MGA, we have to provide a listing of outstanding taxes to the council. Now, 2018, we have 3 properties scheduled for auction. And I think all those 3 properties are attached for you to see as well. So what we are requesting from council is just to approve the condition of sale for us to go through.
All right, any questions? Councillor Beckerin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Orwa, how long must the taxes be in arrears before you can proceed? Is that 2 years, is it?
2 years.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
And majority of those, those 3 properties, they are there just because of their 2017 is still outstanding.
All right, any other questions? Someone prepared to make a motion? Councillor Beckerin.
Mr. Mayor, I move that council approves the following conditions pertaining to the March 25th, 2019 tax sale of property of tax accounts 4450340, 5249-380, and 5254-120. And 1, a tax values for each roll number be set as the reserve bid, these being the assessed values provided by the town's assessors, and the terms of the sale are 10% cash deposit, balance within 45 working days.
All right, thank you. Motion on the table. Any further discussion? All in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. On to item 6.3, assessment services agreement. Mr. Armfield.
Yes, Benchmark Assessments is the assessor that we have used for a number of years to tell us what our properties are valued at, and then we turn that into a mill rate, and that's how we collect our revenue. And Ms. Parsons is going to identify to council that that agreement is up, and we are looking at extending an agreement with Benchmark Assessments to continue to be our assessor, if council is in agreement with that. And Ms. Parsons, please continue.
Mr. Armfield. Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor and councillors. Benchmark has been the assessor for the town for the past 20 years. In this agreement, we have the option to renew for an additional 5-year period. Historically, the price rates in the agreements have been a 50-cent increase per parcel each year, as you can see in your documentation. This year, we're looking at a fixed rate of $25 per parcel for 5 years, which actually amounts to about a $9,500 savings for the town. The only other change that you see in the agreement is the addition of a Schedule E, which covers additional assessment services as requested by the town, and we would be charged at a certain rate should we need those services only.
All right, thank you. Any questions? None whatsoever. Somebody prepared to make a motion? Councilor Brown.
Mr. Mayor, I'm prepared to make a motion. That council approves entering into the provincial services agreement with Benchmark Assessment Consultants Incorporated to be effective May 1st, 2019 until revoked by council, and that all expenses be taken from the annual operating budget. And the council appoints Lance Wayleach to the position of assessor.
All right, thank you. Motion on the table. Councilor Beckering.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. Did you squeeze them a little as hard as you could?
Squeezed them as hard as I could.
Thank you.
All right.
And then a little harder.
All right, motion on the table. Any further discussion? All in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. On to item 6.4, change in 1/3 federal tax exemption, elected officials. Mr. Armfield.
Yes, when we were preparing the agenda, Mr. Mayor, you had asked to put this back on the agenda. Doing so with a bit of a concern with regards to the procedural bylaw. There is a note to the procedural bylaw, and it's just not quite clear within that procedural bylaw. Well, the unfortunate thing is that to me it is quite clear in that procedural bylaw that if something is accepted as information or not accepted as information, the point of the procedural bylaw is that where a resolution has been voted upon, either carried or defeated, other than a motion to table, which the previous motion was not to table, it was for information, the item shall not be allowed to be brought back to any regular council meeting for further consideration until at least 6 months following the date of the council meeting where it was originally addressed. So the subject matter of the 1/3, the change in the 1/3 federal tax exemption, which is the subject of this bylaw, was brought forward to council. Council did accept that as information, and then in the request to bring it back and put it back on the council agenda package prior to that 6 months leaves a bit of a gray area with regards to that procedural bylaw. So there's a couple of questions here. Is the test of council a 2/3 majority to bring this back for a conversation? And then something else that council could consider that would be instructive is to actually bring back that procedural bylaw and note in there that if something is accepted by information, there is still the possibility to bring that back within that 6-month time frame. So there's two elements here. The first being the subject of the request for decision, which is essentially the 1/3 federal tax exemption being removed, and then the 2/3 majority necessary to bring that back for conversation according to your procedural bylaw.
All right, thank you. Any questions? Councillor Strauss?
Yes, Your Worship, I gather that you've asked to put this back onto the council agenda? Is that?
I have through some actual ask.
Can you explain to us why we want to bring this back?
It's through the ask of other council members.
So you're not the only one. There's several council members that have asked for this to come back.
That's correct.
And no reason why.
It was dealt with simply by information. I guess that's where some of the gray area comes in, as Mr. Armfield indicated there, and I asked the same question. We have had a number of things that we have taken for information, and that same topic item comes up sometime at a next meeting or soon after for an actual decision, often in delegation formats, but that has happened. So in my mind, and I think other councillors as well, that request for information is just that. That's not an actual decision for any action, but it is a base motion that's made in a variety of cases. Councillor Becker?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. There's two issues here that Mr. Armfield addressed, and I think we should address it. The 2/3 part, I think, is important. in this particular case also. And I also think that the procedural bylaw as it's written right now is very clear to me. I think you're treading very dangerous ground if you say, well, it was taken for information, so you can bring it back anytime. I don't think we should become involved in that. Regarding the subject at hand, we can discuss that later, Mr. Mayor.
Right, any other questions? So we would need a motion related to the 2/3 requirement?
Yeah, so the recommended motion on this, essentially the subject at hand, of bringing back the conversation for the 1/3 federal tax exemption disappearing, that would need to pass with a 2/3 majority.
All right, Councilor Becker.
Mr. Mayor, I'll make that motion then.
All right. Just to read that out accordingly.
Make the motion, Mr. Mayor, that we address the federal tax exemption for elected officials at this meeting by a 2/3 majority vote.
All right, motion on the table. Any further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Mr. Armfield.
Yeah, so that clears that up, certainly. So we will bring that back at a future council meeting. I understand at the next council meeting at the end of January, there may be some councillors missing from that meeting. So we can work that out, Mr. Mayor, between you and I as to when that might be best put on the perhaps the first meeting in February's council meeting. And then if council would like at this point to make any direction on the procedural bylaw or save that for the standing items, would certainly appreciate some feedback if your administration handled this one correctly, or if you would like to see a change in how we have interpreted that procedural bylaw. That would be instructive for us.
All right, thank you. On to item 6.5, whistleblower hotline ethics alert. Mr. Armfield.
Yeah, so this is the quarterly report that we get from MNP indicating that there either has or there has not been a phone call to the whistleblower hotline, and with this letter I can confirm that there has not been any whistleblower hotline inquiries over the last quarter of 2018, and so that's just shared for council's information.
Any other questions? Councilor Chavez?
Yes, Your Worship, I'm ready to proceed with the motion.
All right.
That council accepts a statistical report from MNP LLP regarding the whistleblower hotline ethics alert for the period of October 1st, 2018 through to December 31st, 2018 for information purposes only.
All right, thank you. Motion on the table. Any further discussion? All in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. On to item 6.7, standing item council requests. Mr. Armfield.
Yes, we can open this one up to council for discussion. Of course, at this point on the agenda is where you have the opportunity to ask administration any questions or give us any instructions through the form of a motion. We have included the information items that you'll see that there is a bit of a to-do list attached to this one, and there has been something that may have perceived as being languishing. That's the conversation with our recycling providers in getting a higher level of service. But we have been engaged in those conversations, and the obligation to reply with a change in the rate for that increased level of service that was asked for a few months ago at this stage in the agenda. We're just in conversations with those providers to see where they'd like to go with that pricing. So it's captured on the spreadsheet so we don't lose it, and we haven't lost it, and just waiting for that information, those conversations to take place.
Right,
so with that, turn it over to council.
All right, any other questions on that, or somebody have any individual standing items they'd like brought forward?
Sorry, and I believe I'm one step ahead. We're the information items, so I'm moving ahead to the standing items. That was just the update on that information item related to the standing items, which I guess is the next item on the agenda.
All right, so no standing items for any individual council member to bring forward. All right, with that, we don't need any motion on that, correct? We're just simply information.
Sorry, this is the information item. So this is related to the standing items, and just giving you the information that we're working on this one. We just haven't got the results yet that we want from the
question related to the information items that are on paper there.
Well, but I think, Mr. Mayor, we do need a motion to accept it as information.
Do we, Mr. Arnold? I believe we're just here in the process, so do we actually need a motion?
The recommended motion is that that you do receive it as information.
Oh.
So that would be that would.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. Somebody
That, Mr. Mayor, I'm prepared to make a motion.
Councillor Tams.
Mr. Mayor, move that council accepts the material received in this agenda item as information.
Motion on the table. Any further discussion? All in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. All right. Oh, we're way ahead of the game here. Our delegation is not set until 5 p.m., correct?
Sorry, Mr. Mayor. I probably caused the confusion with the last agenda item that I didn't do a very good job of introducing. Now we are actually on the standing item RFD. The previous item was an information item for council that came out of this standing RFD. So that was my I've got the Hollywood jitters since we're on TV now. Maybe I don't know.
All right.
Blame it on the bright lights and the cameras and paparazzi and all that stuff. So
It's your form of apology. I accept it.
yes, my apologies to council. Anyway, here if there's any direction to administration or council questions that you may have for administration, now is the time to ask those, please.
All right. Are there any questions? Councillor Becker.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. Since we just voted on the tax exemption for elected officials issue, might as well bring it up. We have time on our side right now anyway. What is administration proposing to present to council regarding this issue?
Mr. Mayor, through to Councillor Beckering, with regards to the 1/3 tax exemption, that was brought back onto the agenda at the request of the mayor. Administration has no more information for you other than what we had provided before. My understanding, though, is there may be a change in the opinion of council to just simply leave that be and continue on with the new tax introduced, though I'm not too sure. You'd have to, Mr. Mayor, speak to your other council members to get clarity there. But administration has nothing new for council.
All right. Thank you. Anything else? Councillor Firth.
Mr. Mayor, in regards to the council procedural bylaw, and it was my impression that when we accepted an item as information that it could be brought back within the 6 months. So if that is not the case, then I am proposing that perhaps we amend that procedural bylaw.
All right, thank you. Actually, I'm of the same opinion. Like, I know we've done things like that before, whether inadvertently or otherwise, but it's happened, and I think I was under that same impression as far as those one information item was voted on, a motion come out of that particular discussion or delegation. There were a number of cases where that certainly did come up at another meeting. Correct. So that's generated some confusion for myself also related to that. So I would agree that that's probably a wise move to look into further and clarify accordingly. Anything else? So you need a motion required to that?
Well, Mr. Mayor, it's always your agenda. So if you would like, if council would like to give us the benefit of a motion that we actually bring that back at the next council meeting or the meeting in February, we certainly can. Or as per the benefit that you have in being the caretaker of the agenda, you can insist that it goes back on at another council meeting, and then it will be on the agenda for consideration. At this point, it's really, with your support, it's up to you how you'd like to see it.
I think all things considered, we know we're down 2 council members next meeting. So the first, I believe everyone's here, the first council meeting in February, are we not? And so I would suggest that it be brought up at that point then. But I believe we'll still need a motion in that regard. Councillor Becker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't know whether we need a motion or not, but I would strongly urge administration, if there is a motion that is brought forward to proceed with the change of the procedural bylaw regarding information, that we get some legal advice, because I happen to disagree very strongly against an information item that is passed by council, which is a decision, and then be brought back at the same time. I don't think that's correct, but I'd like to see some legal advice on that, Mr. Mayor, from administration.
All right, Councillor Stramos?
Yes, Your Worship, you know, we do have a procedural bylaw for a reason, and we have circumvented that in the past, you know, with that 2/3 vote. And I don't see a need to bring that and rehash that procedural bylaw. It's there for a reason. I think it just opens the door for more, if we adjust that and say we can bring it back, it just opens the door for us to rehash things time and time again. That 6-month period is there for a cooling off period for the decision that we made, and it's best left intact for that reason, and there is a procedure to circumvent that if need be. So I would be against that totally.
Anything else? Councillor Firth?
Just trying to craft the motion. I move that administration brings back the council procedural bylaw with the amendment that if an item is accepted as information, it can be brought back within the 6 months.
All right, thank you. Did you want to clarify the date for the meeting?
To the first meeting in February. Is that what we're thinking? Which is February 11th?
Sounds correct, yeah. All right.
It's motion, but that works.
Sir Bruin.
Mr. Mayor, I appreciate what you're saying, Councillor Firth, and I tend to agree with you. When you accept something for information, you're not making a decision yes or no. You're thinking on it, or you're putting it to the side for more thought. So I think it's something, like Councillor Beckman was saying, perhaps we should get a legal opinion on to see if we can do it. But I think it's something we should look into, because we may be opening a gate we don't want to by doing this, or it may make things a lot easier for us. So I'd like to see a little more information about it. I'd support your motion to check it out.
Councillor Stramos.
Your Worship, Councillor Firth is making a specific recommendation to a procedural bylaw. I think perhaps what she should be doing is asking for the procedural bylaw to be brought back to council with a legal opinion on making revisions to it of this kind, rather than making a specific request to change, to adjust the bylaw. My interpretation is that she wants it specific.
Is that a suggestion of a friendly amendment, Councillor Strovos?
Nope, because I'm not going to vote in favor of it anyways.
All right, so okay, Councillor Thames.
I'm also not going to vote in favor of it, but Councillor Strovos' opinion to bring it back to look at it, I think is a way better thing than to define what we're going to do, because there's more in that procedural bylaw than just for information stuff. I like the procedural bylaw we have for a simple fact it gives us time to look at stuff. If it needs to come back, if we accept something for information, and in that procedural bylaw we also have the ability to accept it for information and bring it to a further council meeting for more information, which is already in our procedural bylaw. So to revisit our procedural bylaw, I totally agree with Councillor Becker in that we need some legal advice on whether we should even be doing that, or if we can do that, because I wonder what the MGA has to say about it too.
Councillor Bruin.
I think correctly, Councillor Thames, like you said, if we accept it for information, that's so we can bring it back in a future meeting. So you kind of said both ways.
No, within a motion, if we accept something for information and bring it back to a further council date, it's in that motion. If we accept it only for information, that the 6-month window kicks in, because we can't accept something for information and bring it to within that motion, bring it to the following council meeting or whatever. It's stated in the date in the motion. It's in our procedure.
Councillor Firth.
even though Councillor Strovos' suggestion was not a friendly amendment, I am going to amend my motion that it comes back with a legal opinion, because that was my intent. The motion wasn't to change the bylaw. My intention with that motion was to bring it back with advice, and if the majority of council doesn't support it, so be it. I just appreciate the clarification that if we accept something as information, that maybe that's something we need to give a little bit more thought to. My impression was when I accepted as information that it can be brought back within 6 months. If that is not the case, then I will be more careful when voting on those motions in the future.
All right, thank you. Amended motion on the table. Any further discussion? Councillor Becker?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Couldn't we read back, please?
Councillor first passed or requested a motion for administration to bring back the council procedural bylaw with the amendment that if an item is accepted for information, that it could be brought back within 6 months to the first meeting in February, on February 11th. And then afterwards, she amended her motion that it comes back with a legal opinion that to include the original motion, but to bring the legal opinion with advice. And then she did speak a little bit after that, so I do have that as well.
Perhaps maybe we could add, instead of a legal opinion, for clarification on that bylaw in the amendment, friendly amendment, that we ask for clarification on that bylaw and what the interpretation is of taking it for information purposes, or if that's done for 6 months. So I'd like to see some clarity on that myself.
Certainly, I would accept that friendly amendment.
We're just performing some administrivia over here to make sure that whatever motion council wishes is exactly what's going to show up in the meeting minutes.
All right, fair enough.
No pressure.
Mr. Mayor, you'll see that on the north and south screens you have the motion for consideration.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Becker.
Second sentence should be back to council, not back the council. Mr. Mayor, also the procedural bylaw number should be mentioned, I believe, in the motion.
Mr. Bruin?
I mentioned clarification. Mrs. Firth, would you like to add that? Did you add that as a friendly amendment?
I believe we did, with
clarification.
a clarification, a legal clarification.
Sorry, can you specify where in the motion we're adding clarification to?
It's a friendly amendment, a legal clarification instead of legal opinion.
A legal clarification of the bylaw of 20-2018. I think, Mr. Mayor, if I may, I think that's what we're asking for, is what is the right, what does it mean?
Certainly. That was the intent of my motion, so yes.
Okay. All right, Councillor Strauss.
Your Worship, the way I read this motion, it says that administration bring back to council the council procedural bylaw with the amendment that if an item is accepted for information, that it can be brought back within a 6-month period. Is that not basically amending the procedural bylaw right here? I mean, I don't think we can do this right here in this meeting. I think the way it's written, we're asking for a change to that procedural bylaw, and we cannot do that here.
Can I have one more shot at it?
Absolutely.
Okay. I would like to amend the motion to say that administration bring back to council a legal clarification of the bylaw of 20-2018 to the first council meeting on February 11th, 2019, with information regarding. I'm trying to read it and it's moving. With information regarding items that have been accepted for information.
I'm not trying to change it. Just asking for information.
Happy with that? That's got it covered?
So.
Councillor Bruin.
I don't, we have to add a little more to that. The information regarding items have been except for information. Do we not there have to ask what for information means? Do we have to be a little more clear that way? Like we're asking, what are we asking them to do? Items have been except for information.
If a motion has been accepted for information, what's
the process after
procedure?
that? The legal process. Do we not, Mrs. First, if I may, do we not need to add that to that?
Asking.
That we need, what you're asking, all you're asking is to say that it says for information, but what does for information mean? Does that mean we can or cannot bring it back?
That's what I'd like to know.
Yeah. Are we stating that properly there?
I think that's where the legal clarification
That have been accepted for
comes in.
information purposes?
That's correct, yeah.
And what is their outcome? Or it's
That's where you get the legal clarification to explain accordingly. Councillor Becker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think we're beating a dead horse here. I think the question is, of course, that what does the decision which was voted on for information mean? It's a decision, so therefore it cannot be brought back for 6 months. I'm pretty darn sure of that, and I think Mr. Armfield agrees with me, but I'd still like to have some legal beagle say, yeah, you guys are correct or not. So I don't know what we're doing here, but.
Councillor Strauss.
Yes, Your Worship, I assume that that this is going to be back charged to the council budget and not anywhere through our administrative services. So this is going to be a cost borne by the council budget. Is that correct? It could get into thousands of dollars, you know.
There's always a cost for legal opinions, doesn't matter what you do. But
Mr. Mayor, I think it's worth it now that we brought it up. We have to proceed because I'd like to know myself too.
All right, there is an amendment motion on the table. Any further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? All right, defeated. Okay, we're on to our delegation format, which is not slated until 5 p.m. So with that, I will need a motion to adjourn until 5 p.m.
Mr.
Councilor
Mayor,
Towns, motion on the table. All in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you.
To the new year.
We're off to a good start. There's an easy way around it. Yeah. You just have to be prescriptive in your motion. Is this for tough one?
Yeah, sometimes, yeah.
Exactly.
If it's for information that it ends now, then there's a 6-month time period.
Time period.
If it's for information to consider
At a later
at a
date.
previous or a subsequent council meeting.
So
It's just a wording of that motion.
If you add that to your
appropriately.
motion, then for information.
Yeah, so you have to have it in your motion. You can't just say we accept this for information and then expect that you're not going to have to.
Yeah, we're definitely not trying.
Yeah.
All right, can I have a motion to reconvene the meeting, please?
Motion.
Councillor Garner, motion on the table. All in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. And on to delegations, item 7.1, Taber District Housing Foundation. Mr. Arnfeld.
Yeah, we have Mr. Tim Jansen here from Taber District Housing Foundation to provide us with a overview report, presentation of 3 reports that were done in the town of Taber that the town of Taber contributed to the funding of. And they talk about the rental market here in town and the need for some accessible housing for the senior citizens. If you would like to drive, Mr. Jansen, you can, the presentation is actually attached here. And if you would like to take us through that, just by clicking the up and down arrows to get you navigating through that, please go ahead. I will turn the floor over to Mr. Mayor and Mr. Jansen.
Thank you, Mr. Jansen.
Right. Well, thank you very much for inviting me here today and for granting us the opportunity to present the information from the Housing and Needs Assessment, and just have a few slides and give you a bit of the methodology and process we went through, some of our findings, a little bit of what next and our ask, and then you can get the tomatoes ready and start firing away and any questions that you have. So feel free to, if you have any questions, happy to answer them. So our Housing Needs and Assessment, in fall of 2017, Taber District Housing Foundation met with the Town of Taber Economic Development Office representatives to discuss how we might collaborate on completing a housing needs assessment. Both parties were interested in knowing more about specific components of the housing market in Taber. Both parties recognized that much of the work completed would be beneficial to each party. I came to you last, I guess, the fall of 2017. You were kind enough to pass a resolution to provide up to $35,000 of funding to cover a portion of the costs. Thank you very much. Without that, we would not have gone and done this work. It also provided the impetus for the MD of Taber Council passing a similar motion to cover a portion of costs for a 3-way collaboration in the assessment. The amount of the funding request was made based on presentations by housing consultants to our organization earlier in 2017. Shortly after securing those funding resolutions, we met with a group called Alberta Rural Development Network, who made a presentation to our foundation board, Town of Taber and MD of Taber economic development representatives, to discuss how ARDN might approach a needs assessment. They'd prepare an affordable housing project concept and strategy document. And as a part of their mandate, they assist rural communities in developing affordable housing projects. Their assistance is available throughout from the needs assessment, concept and design, financing, and finally construction project management. They also provide these services at a significant discount because they do get some grant funding themselves, and they also know that rural communities often don't have a lot of financial resources. So I'm pleased to announce that the total amount of all the work performed to date was around $23,000, which means about $7,500 or 20% of the funds committed by the Town of Taber were used. But we got all the work done. And what was that work? The ARDN research staff analyzed some census data from StatsCan for the years 2011 and 2016. They gathered information from Alberta Health Services, which is normally used to determine healthcare needs for a community's future. So AHS looks at demographic information, I think between 10 and 30 years out, to determine what size of hospital, what number of long-term care beds, what number of DAL units, those sorts of things are needed based on population growth. Finally, ARDN received real estate information from your own economic development department And all of this information formed the basis of the statistical analysis which they completed in first quarter 2018. In March of last year, a number of information sessions were held with local stakeholders where ARDN could present the statistical information, but also ask for more qualifying information from local stakeholders. So we had one meeting at Clearview Lodge with the senior residents. We met actually over at the MD's conference room with representatives from health and social service agencies, the clergy, school divisions. We saw that as the service sector. We also met with representatives of from local employers, real estate professionals, both developers and agents. We saw that kind of as the labor drivers of the community. The findings of these sessions were documented in a document we call Taber Information Session Summaries. And if you want to get like pounds of paper dropped on you, Phyllis and Ben have access to a ShareSync folder for those documents, and if they can't find them, I'll be happy to provide them. Then in April, we actually had an evening community forum. Some of you were there. We had some roundtable discussion with some key topics trying to, one, understand affordable housing, look at the issues and needs related to housing along the continuum for the vulnerable population of Taber and area, and then also addressing housing issues affecting the vulnerable peoples of Taber and area. Finally, attendees were allowed to write down their thoughts and just submit them to ARDN for compilation. We also put out an online survey that was advertised online in the paper. I believe they went out in bills for the town of Taber, the MD of Taber. They were on your website. We got 46 responses that also, and all of that information was compiled into a document we call Taber Community Consultation Summary Document. All of this work formed the basis of three major documents. One, a business case financial model, which was the backbone of our submission to the Alberta government, the Alberta Seniors and Housing Department, for a proposed affordable housing project. There's also a document referred to as Alberta Housing Project or Affordable Housing Project Strategy, how to move forward with the proposed project. And finally, an affordable housing strategy for Taber and area to make housing more affordable. And it might be useful, we, in our work, we talk about affordable housing as housing that is usually between 40 and 60% of market. I doubt that that's the way councillors or the town economic development department or real estate agents would talk about affordable housing. So I think when I refer to affordable housing, I'm referring to a specific type of housing within the social housing continuum, usually 40 to 60% of market rent. And I will talk about, I think, more housing that people can purchase as attainable housing, because they're two separate issues. But unfortunately, the terminology sometimes gets used interchangeably. So what did we find? Well, affordable housing guidelines say it's kind of an industry standard that housing should not exceed, or shelter costs should not exceed 30% of a household's income. If it does, that household is referred to as being in core housing need. The needs assessment determined that 18% of homeowners and renters in Taber are spending more than 30% of their income on shelter. And that compares to Alberta being at around 11.4%. However, what's really interesting or dismaying is that households that rent residential properties often pay a greater percent of their income for shelter than those that own homes. This assessment doesn't get into why that is, but it usually is because renters may not generate an equivalent income, either due to lower wages or the likelihood they may not be able to secure full-time employment, right? Right, in this economy, lots of people are working many part-time jobs to come up with an income. It's difficult to find a traditional full-time 40-hour per week job. Or rental market prices can be quite high. So you've got this low income, high market price. But there's no doubt that renters represent a far greater percentage of the households in core housing need, and Taber is no exception. Census 2011 reported that 24% of individuals in non-subsidized housing rental were in core housing need. So you already are excluding any of our clients that are in subsidized housing. This is people in the general populace. Per Census 2016, that number had increased to 34%. So more than 1/3 of people who rent in the community are paying more than 30% of their income in shelter. So it was an increase of 42% in 5 years. Now, I believe probably... Sorry, go ahead. Was there a question? Oh, sorry. I believe one area of more investigation should be considered when we look at the presentation of the average rents. Sorry, just scroll this up here. So you see some average rent rates there. And many people have told me that they actually look kind of low. One of the rationales is that it's an average. What we found was there are really two distinct rental markets in Taber. There's high-end properties. They tend to be newer, larger, more amenities, and likely not affordable, particularly to single individual households. Interestingly, almost zero vacancy. It's almost impossible to find a higher-end home. Then there are properties at the lower end of the spectrum. Typically, they're older, smaller, and I will only use the words of some of our information session attendees. The nicest thing they would say is they're not in great shape. The units are more affordable, but there are some serious questions about suitability. Either due to size, so people are cramming in a large family into a smaller place, or suitability. They simply just are not in good condition. The vast majority of vacancies in Taber are attributed to the lower end properties. As a result of these findings, some people that have reviewed these documents with me have said that the average rents seem low. It's one of the consequences of using an average. I would say that it's also something that should be included in our future work if we can do so. Also, just want to note that all of these rent figures do not include utilities, which are just an additional cost. I think it's interesting, though, to see that the required wage to maintain affordability in the current environment is still $18.38 per hour, which is considerably higher than the current minimum wage rate. One comment I had on the owning side, I do not know if the income required to qualify that's presented there, it looks like it's based on a 2014 report. So I actually would expect the new mortgage test and stress requirements would actually raise that number even higher. And I don't know if there are actually a lot of homes available in Taber in that $250,000 range. Who is in need? I'll just move to the next slide. This infographic shows 4 basic groups: the couples with children, the couples without children, lone parent families, and non-family households. And that's a quite encompassing group, but it tends to simply refer to single people. It could be single people as roommates, but they don't identify as a couple, but generally single people. It shows the disparity in the different groups of individuals. And our organization finds it actually really informative because we we can do something with our property inventory for couples with children and lone parent families. Our senior apartments might very well address couples without children, because many of those may very well be seniors. But we have no properties to deal with single individuals under the age of 60. And also it shows that there are a significant number of households that are simply in core housing need, for that range of 43 to 86. And the census data suggests that the situation is getting worse over time. I would suspect subsequent work would have to be done to better identify those households, because of course this is based on census data. It's not based on specific properties or specific people. So what to do with this information? Well, ARDN has 4 recommendations in their affordable housing strategy. The first of which is take inventory and assess total renter and owner market in Taber. This process would require a significant investment in administrative time to research local properties. You're essentially going from statistical data to actually trying to drill down and say, okay, like, how many properties do we have in town? And how many do identify? Maybe there's non-conforming suites, that maybe there's more supply than we thought, or maybe there's more demand. But it's the goal of this action would be to ensure you have the most accurate information about the rental housing market and the owner market in Taber. The next step is estimating homelessness in Taber. And I know we don't really think of rural communities having homeless people in the traditional sense of an urban setting. But I can tell you that we see clients on a weekly basis that are couch surfing, living with friends or families on an informal or temporary basis. We see, so while we don't see people sleeping in Confederation Park, we have tons of people that live year-round in campers in the parks or in their family's farmyard. And it's not because they want or choose to live in those arrangements. It's because they can't afford anything else. I think the biggest thing is it's useful to identify, to measure this, because the only way you'd know if you're making a difference by taking future actions is to have a baseline and then do the measurement again and see if you're changing. Are there as many people living in non-conforming suites or in non-suitable arrangements? And non-suitable, we mean there's too many people in a unit. The third recommendation is increase the supply of affordable housing, high-density housing, and starter homes in Taber. And here, unfortunately, I think ARDN mixes 2 definitions. Because, yeah, I think there needs to be more affordable housing in our definition, but I think you've already identified that there needs to be more attainable housing in Taber as well. The last one probably speaks more to economic development work, but the comment is address the commuter flow in Taber, in the town of Taber. And they found over the census data that there is really a varying amount of people either commuting in or commuting out. Between 2000 and 2005, there were up to 1,000 people a day going from Taber to somewhere else. By 2016, it had almost reversed. There's about 1,000 people a day that drive into Taber, then leave Taber. They identified that the major communities that people are coming from are Barnwell, Coaldale, and Lethbridge. And we brought that up at the community consultation, and I think it's like everybody has a belly button, everybody has opinion as to why. There's no real research as to why that is. Everybody has an opinion. I think it might be useful to see if you can figure out. If you get into this document, ARDN talks a lot about how to go about determining it and some recommendations of maybe how to change the tide. It could be as simple as lots of business moved into town, they needed workers, they paid good wages, people drove from afar. But it could be as simple as it's cheaper to live somewhere else to drive to Taber than it is to buy in Taber and live here. Don't know. People smarter than me can figure that out. In terms of the project and concept that ARDN worked with us to try and meet that or that single household, it was based on renter households in core housing need that were disproportionately represented by couples without children and single households, and given that we have no inventory for single individuals under the age of 60. The overall concept for this idea or this project is for what they call a mixed market design. It would incorporate not only affordable units, but also near market units, which are considered 80 to 90% of market rent. It might also incorporate commercial space on the main floor with housing units on higher floors. That possibility for commercial space really depends on the siting of the project and the appropriateness of commercial units. If you put it on commercial property or near the downtown, it might make a lot of sense to have commercial. If it's in a residential area, it makes no sense to have commercial. The idea behind mixed market properties, the affordable and near market, is that as household income increases, the form of rent can change, or the amount of rent can change, but the tenant remains in the unit. The unit is agnostic. It doesn't care what the tenant earns. The lease simply is calculated based on their income. Only the tenant and landlord know the amount of the rent. One of our current challenges at the Housing Foundation is in social housing, if a client's income increases over the cumulative net income threshold, they're no longer eligible for social housing. We evict them because they made too much money. The reality is that they'll be back on the application list in 6 months to a year because their income likely can't make the leap from social housing rates to market rates. There's nothing in between. And it's quite possible that they would even consider quitting their job so that they once again are eligible for social housing. I don't think that's the cycle that we want to see. Affordable housing rental rates are going to be more than social housing rates, but they will be low enough that the units can still be affordable for lower income earning individuals, either on minimum wage or those that may not be able to secure full-time hours. As well, the affordable housing rates for this project will include the cost of utilities, making the unit even more affordable. The mix of market units makes the overall project more feasible, provides a different type of property that may or may not be available. It's likely to be a bit smaller, but it may be in that rent point where people who currently drive from Lethbridge, say, couldn't find what they wanted. If you look on the slide, you'll see basically we were looking at an 18,000 square foot building that would have 20 affordable housing units, 6 of which are bachelor suites, 14 one bedroom, 10 market housing units, 6 one bedroom, 4 2 bedroom. We did add one 1,500 square foot commercial space, but we would do more, and the more we can do, the more feasible the project becomes. But currently that would be a space we pay rent as a foundation. I'd much rather pay for a mortgage of a building that provides this sort of service than pay rent. You can see that the rates would be fairly similar to where the market rates are, but there's probably $150 to $200 worth of utilities buried in these prices. And partly that's based on the design. You have modular housing units that have tons of insulation in them, and they would also use net zero technology, trying to use some passive solar panels, as a means to greatly reduce utility costs. If you say it fast enough, it doesn't seem like a big number, but it's still a big number. And we have put that in for proposal with the provincial government, but we haven't had any feedback at all, which is kind of par for the course. They tend to tell you a day or two before the budget is released that they want you in Edmonton, and then you know you're in. But that is a proposal. Is it the best one? Don't know. I'd like to do a lot more work to see if there are some things. I have included a few concept drawings of communities that are a bit ahead of us. And I have no idea whether I like this particular layout or not, but it's to show you that it doesn't have to be a box. You can incorporate architectural design and make it look decent while also making it energy efficient. Now, this is a project that actually the government has funded. When we worked with them, it was still in the proposed stage. The last budget announcement, this is designed for the YMCA in Banff. And so they actually, ARDN worked with them for a number of years to come up with design and make sure that it would fit in the overall aesthetics in Banff. And I guess their feather in their cap is that if you can get something built in Banff, they think you can get something built anywhere. Because I think you have to deal with the provincial government, the federal government, and the municipality of Banff to get approval on anything. And these are some one unit or one design that they've had in Edmonton. Not a great, you can't get a lot of information from it other than you can put nice finishes in affordable housing. You can put durable finishes so that you're reducing your maintenance costs.
Before Your Worship, before you go on, just perhaps you need to explain a little bit about this unit in Banff, that they are container units. They're
yeah. So one of the things that ARDN did, they are very proactive, and so they approached the federal government, and CMHC has a program called Innovation Fund, and ARDN was actually successful in getting funding for innovation funds, and the innovation is use of CCAN units and also use of net zero technology. And so they are, the idea is that they work with a number of different manufacturers that convert CCAN units into 8x20 modules that are all built off-site, and in about 3 days a crane places them. And I know they talked about from design to construction and completion as little as 90 days. So it's a very quick process.
Excuse me, those pictures that you show down further of the suites, those are container units that have been finished.
Yeah, these are all buildings based on container design and then with exterior finish. Even the one from Banff is a CCAN construction concept. I don't know that we are necessarily married to that concept. I think there are merits to modular construction. There are some more local contractors that are involved with modular. But that said, I think it comes down to if it got down to the brass tacks of we have funding and we're ready to build, that's where a number of other considerations could be taken by funders and how you might influence the level of local participation. I think that a project like this can be also seen as an economic driver in the community if you can find ways to get the community more involved. That might be sourcing supplies, or it might be sourcing labor. I think one of the sad parts of many large projects is that they don't often consider that economic impact in the community because they simply parachute crews in, and I think there's potentially missing something there. But I don't know that what exactly it will look like or what the design would be like. Simply included the pictures to show that it isn't necessarily a box. It can be made to look good, and it definitely can be made aesthetically pleasing for the tenants. So what's next? Most of these points are about enhancing and improving the quality of the proposal to ensure we're doing our homework in hopes of achieving the highest probability of success. In February, I want to report back the actual documents to the people who took the time to participate in the community information sessions. Those sector groups, we can glean more information from them, and we can also get more complete information. Absolutely want to search for partners. There are many not-for-profit groups or industry groups that are looking for space in town. I know I look at our own facility. We have a boardroom that gets used 2 or 3 times a month. Would there be a way to set up something more collaborative that we have shared space? We don't use all the space that we have, but it's expensive. And every one of the organizations in the community has those sorts of costs. We want to meet with potential tenants. We might have a great idea. They might think we're crazy. You want me to live in what? Ultimately, you'd like to think if you build it, they will come. I think we do have to determine a better guarantee of success, that this is what they want and this is what we can do it at a price point. Will they, would they live in there? Particularly in the market rent, can we fill it? Because we need to. Then finally, we'd look at potential siting options and lobby the government for funding. So yeah, we've politely asked, we filled out all the paperwork, but we haven't pushed. The more momentum we build and the more people buy into it, the more we can push. What's our ask? Well, what was it, $5.3 million? We'd like to continue to work with the town of Taber and the MD of Taber. The economic development people have been fabulous, a great resource. So thank you for allowing them to work with us. We'd like to keep working with them. I'd like to dig more into the inventory, assess those renter and owner markets, participate in the homelessness survey. There are some allocated funds, so some of those things will take a little bit of money. So can we do more further consultant work with ARDN? Can we get together with all these people? Those things do take a little bit of money. Most of them just take time, but some of them do take some money. The bigger ask would be find and secure an appropriate site. Our proposal did say that we would have land, because that's one thing the government insists upon. Community's not serious if they don't have land committed. I don't think that means you have to own it before they approve it, but it does mean that there's an expectation if they approve it that land will be found, and quickly. I think that you are all doing a bunch of work in terms of determining where land might be available in the town. We would be very honored if we could work together to see if there would be an appropriate place to put this sort of facility. And the last thing is, support. Currently, I think it's moral, but eventually it will be financial. To successfully launch this, it will take some money. And we hope that this would be one way to address both issues. One, for our affordable housing, but definitely those units are going to make housing affordable and attainable for a specific subset of people. And if they move out of current units, it's also going to make more housing available for other people as well. So that's my presentation. Any questions?
Questions whatsoever for Mr. Jansen? All right, thank you so much. I think, thank you very much for your presentation. I believe a letter campaign is probably never a bad idea. We could certainly do that as the town of Taber, and I believe if we asked the MD would do the same, or if you've asked them the same question, and probably our MLA Grant Hunter and our MP Martin Shields. So letters go a long way in that regard, and so the more government support you can get in any capacity for the benefit of a community, particularly with a project like this, it's definitely an option that needs to be followed up on.
Your Worship,
Councillor Chavez?
I would just like to make a few more, a little bit of a comment, just to throw something out there, being that the town and the MD is working towards, a facility for FCSS. Perhaps the town and the MD should work together and put up some money into a project that like this, that on the lower level could house FCSS, literacy, the indigenous group that's formed in the city here, and also have commercial space for Taber and District Housing on the bottom of it. And I mean, if we're going to spend $400,000 or $500,000 remodeling a building for FCSS that needs to be brought up to a certain standard, why not put that kind of money into a project like this here? I think it's something that council should take a hard look at and see if there is an angle that we could work together on this.
All right. I think we do have a suggestion for a joint meeting with the MD coming up soon, so I think that certainly could be an agenda item, I believe, Mr. Armfeldt, correct, as far as something that would be applicable?
Yes, that would be suitable for an agenda item. Yeah.
All right. So any other questions or comments? All right. Again, once again, thank you, Mr. Jansen, for your presentation. Appreciate that very much.
For your time.
Thank you. All right. Somebody prepared to make a motion? Councillor Thames.
Mr. Mayor, I move that council accepts the information from Taber and District Housing Foundation and amends Resolution 376-2017 to permit the original funds of $35,000 from operating reserves to partially fund Taber and District Housing Foundation needs assessment and project feasibility analysts, and to be utilized for the additional project expenses.
All right. Thank you. A motion on the table. Any further discussion? All in favor? Carried unanimously. Good, thank you. On to media inquiries. Taber Times, Trevor?
Pursuant to item 6.4, what FOIP exception are you guys going to be discussing that?
Sorry, the FOIP exemption section?
The change in 1/3 federal tax. You guys are discussing that in camera. I just voted on that.
Oh, okay, that's right, correct. Mr. Armfeldt?
No, that's not on the agenda this evening. The 1/3 federal tax is not on the closed session agenda.
So what was just decided
earlier? What was just decided earlier was to add that to a future council agenda.
So a discussion of that will be in camp at a future council?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. It's got it covered, Trevor?
Yeah.
Anything else? Okay. And I would ask for a motion to move into closed session, please. Councillor Brune?
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion that we move into closed session.
Motion on the table. All in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you.